Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here with the Yamaha Super Tenere 1200 today, which sits as the biggest adventure model as well as one designed to cover that well-spec'd 2-up performer that should be capable of touring, adventure, a bit of sporty riding and just generally being an all-rounder. It's not as well known perhaps as the GS or Super Adventure, but the Super Tenere has a lot to offer and is priced in Australia at a smidge under 26k on the road, while coming with electronic suspension, a large 23 litre fuel tank, 1200cc parallel twin with traction control, spoked but tubeless wheels, adjustable screen, adventure and touring ergos, and just offering bucketfuls of fun. This is a road review despite a few easy fire trail explorations, and I'd say the Super Tenere is an ideal choice to consider for those after a do-it-all ADV. So let's take a more in-depth look at Yamaha's biggest adventure option. So as I just mentioned, the heart of the Tenere 1200 or the Super Tenere is this parallel twin performer. So in a way, the family heritage of the two Tenere models is that they both have a 270-degree crank parallel twin in them, and it is a really cool offering. While it's, a very different option than the Tracer 9 GT, which I last rode, the engine is an absolute gem. Being the parallel twin with that 270-degree crank, it has got really nice torque down low. It is quite punchy. It's certainly got a bit more engine braking down low as well as a result. But in those lower parts of the rev range, which is for a lot of people where they're going to be spending a lot of their time riding, you are getting that beautiful torque down low. And of course that develops into a nice, quite linear top end, which I would say is almost, it's easy to forget kind of what speeds you're doing. It's easy to look down at the speedo at those higher speeds and go, oh wow, I've picked up significantly more speed than I would realize. It's quite smooth and it does just keep revving. However, I would say the lower part of the rev range, the low to mid range, is where the bike really shines. And certainly as an adventure style machine, where we are of course talking about riding it in kind of mixed conditions, I think the punchiness down low is going to be a significant factor there for people who are after the bike for that specific thing. So for everyday use, ideal. For having fun through the twisties, again, keeping it low in the rev range, you can really have some fun. It is super punchy out of the corners. The engine braking, as I mentioned, is quite strong as well. So you can really use the downshifts to slow the bike right down as well quite actively. And it's just a really nice engine. There's no quick shifter, so that is something worth mentioning. I would probably describe this bike as being, like a last generation as far as the technology. So it doesn't have the quick shifter on it. It doesn't have some of the more advanced electronics that we do see in the, the top tier adventure bikes these days. However, in saying that, it has everything covered. It has the traction control. It has the ride modes, which make a little bit of a difference there as well. It does have the electronic suspension. Maybe not some of the really fancy stuff, but you do need to ask yourself really whether that makes much of a difference for you. It might be a nice addition to have, but certainly the package, the electronics package on this is, I would say, it's got all the bases covered. It just misses a few of those new spangled things that we've seen on bikes these days. And I don't think that's much of a criticism. While we're talking about the engine, I will mention it has a hydraulic clutch. That does mean it's got a little bit of a heavier clutch feel and a clutch pull to it. Good 6-speed gearbox, solid gear shifts, quite tall gears, and even in first gear with almost no revs, you can kind of just lug it along. It's quite a forgiving engine. You will feel those lugs if you are too low in the rev range in too high a gear, but it pulls through those very easily. And as I said, it smoothens right out up in the top end. So let's talk brakes and wheels. I'm really impressed with the Super Tenere because it might be a bit hard to see, and I'll put a bit of a close-up shot, but these rims, you've got a 19-inch front and a 17-inch rear. And very noteworthy is obviously they are a spoked rim, which is what most people want in an adventure bike. That is great to see. However, the spokes aren't run into the rim itself. They're kind of offset. There is a special name for that. However, that means that you can run tubeless tires. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility, I would say, in that you can run tubeless tires, as I mentioned. You can still run tubed tires as well, and you can, some people like to have a tube handy in case they get a flat or something like that to run inside it. but it gives you just that extra flexibility, and certainly for a more premium adventure style machine, that is what we expect. Most of my testing has been on the road because, as you can see here, it's got some pretty road orientated tires for it, but we have just kind of come down a few fire trails and things like that, and it's handled that with ease because the ergonomics of the bike are very much designed for that. And a set of knobbies and you'll have, you know, transformed the bike enough, I would say, to get into the more serious kind of adventure style stuff, or maybe just, you know, a slightly more hard-nosed kind of thing. So you could go a dual purpose set of tires or a set of, you know, more serious knobbies there. The brakes themselves, we're getting 4-piston calipers on the front, dual discs, 310mm rotors. It's got a really nice level of brake performance on the front, good feel, good power. I like the overall setup. You know, it is backed by ABS as well. On the rear, I think it's a 282mm rotor, so it's quite a large rotor on the rear, and the brake performance on the rear of the bike is kind of the standout. While the front is really good, that rear has quite a lot of bite to it, and certainly if you're, again, getting into the more adventure style riding, you'll probably be using the rear quite a bit, even if it's to lock up the rear and, you know, control the bike a little bit more, especially standing up on the bike. And standing up on the bike, the foot controls, I did actually adjust them down to the more like sport touring and general use. But if you are jumping on this bike and you're using it for adventure, there's plenty of adjustability there to get those foot controls where you'll need them to use that rear brake very, very easily while standing on the bike. So as a bit of context about electronic suspension, I will say that obviously coming from traditional suspension, you can find that transition quite an unusual kind of thing because the electronic systems do handle just differently. Now, on the Super Tenere, we're getting an electronic suspension system where you can set basically the preload within 4 presets. So you can go rider and luggage, 2 riders and luggage. So that gives you your preload setting as far as kind of the expected weight within the bike. Then you have 3 modes that you can set it to: hard, soft, and standard. And so obviously they do what the name suggests. And then within those, you actually can add and subtract from those. So you can go plus and minus on those specific modes. And I think you get 6 levels of adjustability. So +3 and -3 on each of those. And that gives you quite a fine level of tuning as far as the suspension itself. However, I guess I would say if there was any complaint about the system overall, it's that I wouldn't have minded having the front forks just a little bit softer and the rear shock probably like jacked up a little bit more and offering a little bit more support. But the one thing I will say in comparison to that is when I rode the Tracer 9 GT recently, I felt like not getting any dive into the forks, which needed to be manually adjusted, was something that detracted from my experience. Whereas on this, with a little bit more dive in the forks, I was able to use the brakes more traditionally as I would prefer to. I was able to compress the front into the corners, and that did make a difference. Certainly putting it onto the harder side of things did affect comfort a little bit, but not as much as I would have expected, certainly. And overall, I just found the electronic suspension on this a very well set up system, very user friendly. You can do it on the fly. It's easily accessed through the dash. And the handling on this bike is a real standout. The level of clearance through the corners, I found myself carrying lean angle quite easily, and I did need to be careful to keep my toes on those pegs because you will touch down, I guess I would say relatively easily. Maybe that's just a factor of the bike really egging you on to carry a bit more speed through the corners, which it does effortlessly. And while this thing was great fun to ride 2 up, I actually had an enormous hoot just on my own, taking it through the twisties and really just riding it like I would ride a sports bike. And the handling there is great. You know, transitions onto the side of the tire, no issues at all. It's nice and stable. It's nice and stable on the side of the tire. It's a really nice handling package overall. And probably the standout to me was the fact I could take it up my nice local roads and have a hell of a lot of fun on it just on my own, while it still delivers all of that 2-up performance. And the handling is by no means impacted by having someone on the back. So you're gonna have fun on this bike no matter what. Now, when it comes to the ergonomics of this bike, it's pretty obvious. This is a tall adventure style bike. So not only is it offering what I guess I would describe as good touring or sports touring ability with a nice wide seat and a nice wide pillion seat, which is gonna offer fairly good comfort. I thought by 2 hours on this seat, I was ready for a break. Whereas With the comfort seat on the Tracer 9 GT in comparison, I was able to go longer, whereas I was very ready for the break at the 2-hour mark on this particular machine. Now, as I mentioned, being an adventure machine, you'll notice the seat actually runs quite a lot deeper here, and you've got these sections here. That is where you're gonna likely be holding on with your knees if you're standing on the bike. So in that regard, and as far as those wide bars, standing on the bike, as I'll show you in just a second, works really well. It's super natural. For me, it's pretty much perfect. And I'm 180 centimeters, 32-inch inseam as a point of comparison. So that works very well. The wide bars obviously do give you good leverage on the bike. Very clear dual display on the front there. And you've got, you know, fairly busy switch blocks as well that give you access to everything in the dash, which is, again, fairly easily accessed. Grab rails on the back. It is ready for a top box. On the front end here, we do have the adjustable screen. It's a little bit fiddly. It is just a hand adjusted one. You've got to get the two sections from locking out, and you can slide it up and down through the range of adjustability, and then it locks into place with, looks like 4 levels of adjustment. So not something you're going to be doing on the run, but it's a 5-minute job. Just tighten those up and you're good to go. You're also getting the projector style headlights there, which is nice to see. So not LED, I don't think, but those older style, the round projectors that we saw in bikes like the R1, you are getting LED indicators. So again, a fairly modern setup and a good throw of light from the bike itself. I did also mention, of course, we've got the hydraulic clutch and we have just a standard master cylinder here. Adjustable levers on both sides, which is nice to see. And there's not a heap else to talk about on the front end. There are some buttons on the dash for resetting the trip meters, and you do have a power outlet there as well, which is nice to see. And that's like the old cigarette style power outlet. So you do have some ability to plug something in on this bike standard. So 840 to 875 millimeter seat height. It is certainly a large machine. It has quite a tall front end. I can just get both feet down, I'd say, on flat ground. I'm a little bit uneven on the ground here, so I'm not quite getting my heel down on the other side. It does have a side stand. It does have a center stand. So for some people, the center stand, like the shaft drive, is really, really important. Yamaha do have that covered for you. And also the width of the bike at the front there is partially because of those side mounted radiators, as something to keep in mind. The seat is quite wide, so don't expect for that seat height for this to be the narrowest machine. I think because we're talking an adventure, the wider seat and the ability to grab onto that seat when you're standing on the bike has been more important than having the bike really, really low. And that's certainly a trade-off, I would say, that is worth it. But if you're a very short rider, you may need to look at a lower seat or perhaps even a lowering link or something like that as far as what you're going to do to the bike. Quite wide bars, very generous wind protection. This is now in the lower setting, but in the higher setting you get quite a bit more height, and that gives you plenty of protection, along with those plastic handguards, which are mainly protection from the elements, but they're not going to do much in a crash. The vision and the seating position is, of course, nice and neutral, pretty relaxed, not stretched out to those bars, a little bit of bend in my arms, and that's a very commanding kind of seating position on a bike like this, which is, again, it's just what we expect. Okay, so final thoughts on the Super Tenere. I just really like this bike. I think at the end of the day, while it isn't the fanciest of the big adventure bikes, it is an exceptional offering as far as value. It has all of the boxes ticked for me, and I could have heaps of fun on this through my local riding roads, which is very, very important for me, as well as having lots of fun two up. It was still a great machine to ride, and I think the flexibility there is what makes these bikes quite popular. Certainly people talk about the adventure side of things, and sometimes, you know, there's a criticism that people don't take them on real adventures. To me, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the person buying the bike buys something that is really suited to their needs and gives them the potential to do whatever they want. Now, perhaps they're not putting knobbies on the bike or dual purpose tires and taking it down fire trails or onto the more rough stuff. Perhaps they're just using it as a road bike, but at the end of the day, this bike will do that very, very well. and there's no reason not to buy it for that reason. However, you still have a bike where you can put those tires on, a quick tire change, and you're going to be really happy, I would say, with doing a little bit, you know, the more adventurous stuff. I am not a hardcore adventure rider, so I'm not going to talk about, you know, jumping this thing and all that kind of stuff over, you know, dirt mounds and things, but I think the overall flexibility here is exceptional. It's a good value option, it's a fun thing to ride, and it's just a great overall package. Anyway, let me know what you think of the Super Tenere down below in the comments. Do you think it's a little bit outdated compared to some of the competition, or do you think at the price point and with the overall inclusions, it's still very much punching above its weight? Let me know, I'll be back soon. You can support the channel on Patreon, and as always, stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.